Welcome everyone to the Kent City Council workshop. Today is Tuesday, August 18th, 2020. And just a reminder, this is a remote meeting due to the COVID-19 coronavirus emergency. So welcome to anyone that is joining us live on Kent TV 21, the Facebook City of Kent website, and the YouTube Kent TV 21 channel. So welcome everyone and welcome council members. We have a couple items on our workshop agenda today, so we are going to go ahead and get started with item number 1, which is a water system update, and I'd like to welcome Sean Bauer.
Thank you, Council President. Madam Mayor, Council President Troutner, Members Council, good afternoon. Thank you for your time today. Every year around this time, we like to provide you with an update on what's going on in the water world. So today I'll touch on water supply, water quality, upcoming rule changes, and projects we've completed since last year and what we're working on currently. Next slide. So our water supply this year continues to be strong. For our groundwater sources, groundwater recharge started out slow in the fall of last year through January of this year with below normal precipitation, but rebounded nicely with above normal precipitation in February and pretty much up until early summer. For our Tacoma Green River supply, snowpack was about 90% of normal this year, but the Corps did reach full storage behind the pool on May 31st. So we began using the stored municipal water behind the dam on June 30th, when the minimum river flows were reached on the Green River at the Palmer Gauge near the Tacoma Treatment Facility. And when I'm talking sources, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite any of you that haven't toured our eastern sources or any of our water facilities, just please let us know and we can get something set up for you. It's something neat to see. With the cooler, wet weather, it took a while for demand to increase this summer. We actually were below our 5-year minimum weekly demand for about 6 weeks up until recently, and are now tracking just above the 5-year weekly minimum. Excuse me. The Howard Henson Dam additional water storage project has been a topic of many water system updates, but there's finally a light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. Mike McTutis and the environmental engineering section have gave many presentations on Howard Henson for flood protection, but I thought I'd note that we are the only municipality on the Green River that uses the dam for both flood protection and drinking water supply. You're doing good, Kim. The Additional Water Storage Project, or AWSP for short, was authorized by Bill Clinton in Congress in 1999. The project was authorized in 2 phases. The first phase is authorized for the storage of 20,000 acre-feet of municipal and industrial water, and the second phase for an additional 12,000 acre-feet of storage to be used for both ecosystem purposes and municipal and industrial storage. In 2003, a project cooperation agreement was signed by the Corps and Tacoma Public Utilities, which included a cost allocation for the project of 1.6%. This means Tacoma, as the non-federal sponsor, is responsible for 1.6% of the project cost and operations and maintenance. As partners with Tacoma in the regional water supply, Kent is responsible for 22% of Tacoma's 1.6%. Phase 1 of the AWSP included projects for ecosystem restoration both above and below the dam, a fish trap and haul facility to move fish above the dam, and a fish bypass system to safely pass juvenile fish and adult steelhead downstream through the dam. Ecosystem restoration and the fish trap and haul facility were all completed, but the design for the fish bypass system reached $349 million, which exceeded the authorized amount of $130 million, so the project was paused. On Valentine's Day in 2014, the Corps and NOAA restarted formal consultation on Howard Henson operations and the ESA impacts on the dam. NOAA issued a new biological opinion in 2019. The result of the biological opinion was an ESA listing for salmon, steelhead, and the impacts that Chinook salmon have as a food supply for southern resident orcas. The biological opinion required downstream fish facilities to be constructed by the end of 2030 and in operation by 2031. Some of the interim target dates are to complete a Department of Army approved post-authorization decision document by 2024, which the Corps has received $3 million in their 2020 work plan to take the next steps to restart downstream fish passage work. Initiate pre-construction, engineering and design, or PED for short, by 2025, and this is assuming it receives congressional authorization and appropriation. Completing the PED by the end of 2027, construction completion by 2030, and begin passing salmonids by 2031. Prior to the downstream fish passage system becoming operational in 2031, the Corps is managing peak flow events to protect fish spawning beds downstream of Howard Hansen Dam. And they're working with Tacoma and federal, state, local, and tribal stakeholders to identify opportunities to better manage flows during juvenile salmon migration that occurs in the spring when the dam is refilling. When phase 1 is complete, phase 2 can occur. I'm not going too fast. Water quality. The city's annual water quality report was completed in early June this year and is once again available electronically to all residents and customers. A postcard was mailed to every resident or business within our service area, directing them to the city website where the water quality report can be viewed, downloaded, or printed. In addition, we printed off about 500 copies to have available on request and to post at various city facilities such as Commons, the Senior Center, Centennial, places like that, places that are closed right now. On the subject of water quality, I'd like to note that the COVID virus has not been detected in drinking water supplies. Based on current evidence, the risk of drinking water is low, according to the Environmental Protection Agency. So your water is safe to drink. We've talked about lead in the past. The city continues to meet the requirements of the lead and copper rule. Our last round of sampling occurred in 2018, and we will sample again next year in 2021. The highest lead level detected in sampling was less than 1 part per billion, and the action level for lead is 15 parts per billion, so we're well below the action level. For copper, the highest detection was 0.12 parts per million, and the action level is 1.3. There is a lead and copper rule revision underway that will impact us slightly. One of the rule revisions is for water utilities to test all schools and daycares within their service area over a 5-year cycle. Currently, schools are responsible for their own testing and have higher acceptable lead levels. They're also looking at some sample collection technique changes. This is a fun one to say. Polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS as they're called, are a group of chemicals in the manufacturing of a variety of products. Things like Teflon in non-stick cookware, water repellent clothing, and some firefighting foam. PFAS have mostly been detected around military bases and fire training facilities. The state is working on rulemaking to set what's called a state action level that would be in effect until the federal government finalizes a national rule with a maximum contaminant level allowed. A maximum contaminant level, or MCL, for contaminant in drinking water is set by the federal government. States can then take what is called primacy of the rule and set tighter restrictions, but they can't be less stringent. The state is looking at setting an action level for PFAS at 70 parts per billion. And we tested for these substances back in 2013 and 2014, and none were detected. However, this new rule that's coming out, the detection level is lower than what we sampled for. I still think we'll be fine. America's Water Infrastructure Act. In October of 2018, President Trump signed the America's Water Infrastructure Act. While most of this law upgrades water resources or flood control infrastructure, more than 20 sections update the Safe Drinking Water Act. One of the provisions of the act is emergency response and resiliency for drinking water systems. We are currently working on a risk and resiliency assessment for the water system for malevolent acts such as physical and cybersecurity, and natural disasters such as earthquakes, fires, and storms. The results of the assessment will provide us with planning tools to increase the water system's resiliency. Another provision of the Act that will affect us is producing a water quality report twice a year instead of once a year. The EPA is required to revise the rules on consumer confidence reports by October of this year, but nothing has been released to review to date. Landsberg Mine. So last year, the mine site waste areas were backfilled with verified clean material that came from the Microsoft campus project. This year, they're working on capping the material with an impermeable geomembrane cover and installing gravel line storm water diversion ditches to discharge surface water off the site to the north. 1,4-dioxane continues to be detected in samples from the north portal wells of the mine. Ecology is asking the potential liable parties to increase their frequency of groundwater sampling from the northern portal wells and to work on connecting the contingency discharge pipe from the north contingent treatment pad to the Sioux Creek sewer line. Ecology and the potential liable parties continue to work on a long-term solution for treating the 1,4-dioxane at the north portal. Slide. Thank you. So there's been quite a few projects completed since last year that I'll go over next. This is the fun part of the presentation, to show progress. Construction of the 640 pump station was completed in March of this year. This $3.5 million facility is the final piece needed to implement the northern portion of our new 640 pressure zone on the East Hill, which I will talk more about here in a moment. The pump station contains 2 daily demand 20 horsepower pumps capable of 600 gallons per minute each, and 2 high flow 125 horsepower pumps, or 125 horsepower pumps capable of 2,250 gallons per minute for fire flow. It's a tongue twister. Pump Station 3 is at the bottom of Reith Road on the West Hill and provides the first step in water supply for the West Hill. The pump station was originally built in the 1950s and was in need of an electrical upgrade. The station had a generator for backup power, but didn't have an automatic transfer switch for when the power went out, meaning a water staff member would have to travel to the site and manually switch over to backup power. With this project, we added that automatic transfer switch, and so in a power outage event, the power transfers automatically. In addition, a new service entrance, motor control panels, variable frequency drives for motor control, and programmable logic controllers were installed. With the new VFDs, we now have the capability of running the station in pressure sustaining mode when we take Reith Road tank offline for repairs or service. Cambridge Tank. Recoating of the interior and exterior of Cambridge Tank on the West Hill was completed. In addition to the paint coating being in bad shape, there were needed structural improvements for both employee safety and security. This project included a retrofit of the access ladder, a landing at the top for employees to safely step off and exit the ladder, improvements to the upper platform, a wider platform around the tank, a new tank vent that protects the water in the tank from the outside environment, and a new fall restraint system for employees. We wrapped up our water system plan renewal late last fall, but it took a while to get through King County's approval process, and then COVID-19 happened. The final approval from the Department of Health was received on July 9th, so our next 10-year plan will be due July 10th of 2030. In developing the plan, we looked at our water supply, current and projected water system demand, projected growth, land use, financial analysis, and our infrastructure. Although it's a 10-year plan, it looks at capital projects 20 years out and beyond at a cost of about $168 million. Projects range from water main replacements, reservoir maintenance and replacements, pump stations, completing the 640 pressure zone, and our capital commitment to the Tacoma Regional Water Supply System. For water supply, the plan looks out 50 years, and we have sufficient supply to meet our projected demand. There are 287 miles of pipe and transmission main in the distribution system. 72 miles of this pipe is 55 years old or older, We continue to replace water mains in-house through our shop sink program. Staff typically complete 6 to 8 water main replacement projects per year, depending on the length and complexity. And the work cost effectively at about $147 per foot versus $317 per foot for contracted replacement projects. Last year, we completed an electrical upgrade and generator replacement project at our Kent Springs source. And this year, we upgraded the programmable logic controller and the programming. This was a project that was done with a combination of in-house SCADA staff and our integrator GoTech. Our goal is to clean and inspect 2 well sources and their pumping equipment per year. We recently completed well number 2 out at our Armstrong Springs source in Covington, and we'll be moving on to well number 1 at the site next. Our Clark Springs Habitat Conservation Plan contains habitat conservation measures for string augmentation or habitat restoration that need to be completed. The Habitat Conservation Plan protects our water right at Clark Springs for 50 years. The plan took us about 10 years to complete, and we are one of only 3 entities in the state that have one in place last I checked. Tacoma and Seattle also have a habitat conservation plan in place. Rock Creek HCM3, or Habitat Conservation Measure 3, was a wetland improvement and juvenile salmonid enhancement intended to connect a small wetland and pond immediately west of Reach 1 near the mouth of the Cedar River. This HCM is intended to make available off-channel rearing and flood refuge for habitat, or flood refuge habitat that can be used by juvenile salmon. The project was completed by in-house water staff as part of our shop sink program this year and wrapped up at the beginning of August. So those were a highlight of some of the bigger stuff that was completed over the past year. So now we'll move on to some of the things. Spent a lot of time talking about the need for additional fire flow and standby water storage needed on the west hill of our water system, and we're getting closer to making that happen. Tank design is underway, and we expect to see 90% plans back for review the end of next week. Tank will sit on the Farmer Cronish Park site at the intersection of 248th and 38th Avenue South on the West Hill, up by the Armory. It will hold 5 million gallons of water for daily demand use and fire flow storage purposes. We expect to go out to bid in October with construction starting in 2021, and it's expected to take about a year to a year and a half to complete. The West Hill Reservoir is kind of a 3-phase project. In addition to the reservoir, a booster station and transmission main up the West Hill is planned as well. This will provide redundancy and efficiency for the water system. Currently, water for the West Hill is carried across the Meeker Street Bridge and pumped up the West Hill in stages. The Meeker Street Bridge doesn't meet today's seismic standards and isn't expected to fare well in an earthquake based on our seismic evaluation we performed on the water system. The current operation of pumping up the hill in stages requires more equipment to maintain and added electricity costs. The new pump station that delivers water straight to our highest pressure zone to supply water to the tank and then feeding water hydraulically back down the hill through pressure reducing valves will save money both in electricity and equipment maintenance. I mentioned earlier the completion of the 640 pump station. We are now ready to implement phase 1 of the new 640 pressure zone, and we'll start September 14th. Mark your calendars. The picture in this slide is the information that will be mailed to residences and businesses in the area that will see a change. This was a kind of a final draft. The only thing left was the date to be added. So if you see July in there, that was just a placeholder. This isn't the final. The area encompasses the general area of 228th to the north and 256th to the south, and between 108th to the west and 124th to the east. The zone will be isolated and levels will be raised in steps and monitored. The overall process to reach the new full operating level will take about a month. There's nothing our customers need to do during this process but enjoy the new higher pressure. Shop sink water main replacements are underway for the year, with projects on First Avenue South and on Fifth Avenue still to come. We replaced water main along with the 76th road raising project, and the water main portion is just about complete. And we just had a pre-con for the Reith Road water main replacement project on Reith Road between 42nd and 38th. That'll be adding a 16-inch main for better fire flow protection. Our 125,000 gallon tank, or 125K tank as we call it, recoating and structural improvement project is underway. The tank is located at our Pump Station 5 site on 98th Avenue, just north of Southeast 240th Street. The tank holds 125,000 gallons and supplies water to our 485 pressure zone. This project includes a new interior and exterior coating, security and access improvements for staff, a new roof vent, and new safety harness system that staff attach to when climbing or maneuvering on the tank. Our generator and electrical upgrade project out at Clark Springs goes to bid the end of September. The current backup power generator is undersized to provide a full system backup, so it's being upsized. The current generator is about, I think it's 45 kW, and the new version will be 450 kW. The project also includes upgrades to motor control centers, automatic power transfer equipment, control systems, and motor drives. The Summit Landsberg Road Culvert Replacement Project is a habitat conservation measure number 5 in our Clark Springs Habitat Conservation Plan. It will replace the existing 3 non-fish friendly culverts, which are pictured in the top left photo, with a bridge. Design is currently at 60%, with 98% coming out shortly. Utility relocation needed for bridge construction will occur next year, with bridge construction the following year in 2022. State Route 516, the Jenkins Creek Road Widening Project, continues to move forward. This is a road project with the City of Covington and the Washington State Department of Transportation that will impact our transmission mains from Clark Springs, Kent Springs, and Armstrong Springs. 90% design should be out soon on that one as well. Construction is expected to take place in the summer of next year and is expected to take about a year to complete. During any water main outages, we will have workarounds with other water sources like our Tacoma Supply or in-town sources. So we have workarounds as they take these out to replace them, and we won't take more than one out at a time. We continue to work our way through well pump and motor inspections as well, and cleaning. The well pump and motor are removed and rehabilitated or replaced depending on the outcome of the inspection. The well casing is TV'd or videoed to determine its condition and the method of cleaning needed. In most cases, it's a simple brushing followed by baling, which is a fancy name for pumping it until it's clean again. In some cases, the well may need a surging and chemical treatment, but we haven't experienced that yet. The wells have been in pretty good shape so far. The well is then videoed again to make sure the cleaning was successful, followed by installation of the rebuilt or replaced equipment. It is recommended to perform this rehabilitation every 15 to 20 years. With 16 well pumps and motors in the ground, it's pretty much a continuous cycle for us. That was a snapshot of key things being accomplished or affecting the water system. There are many other projects happening in addition to maintenance activities, sampling, water treatment, things of that nature. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have, and thank you again for your time today. And for the first time ever, I didn't exceed my time.
Thank you so much, Sean, for all of that great information. You're welcome to have all the time you need, but we appreciate you spending time with us today. Great report. A lot of things that we've been able to get done, but a lot of things, good things we have coming up. I know Councilmember Fincher, you probably would agree, but looking at the picture of the Landsberg mine and how that's completely filled in is amazing.
Yes.
Two of us had been there, I believe it was last year, and wow, they've done a lot of work there. So it's always good to see how these things progress. So
Yeah.
really cool. So again, council members, if you have not had a chance to see, any of these things that we have going on, I'm sure Sean would be happy to help you to see those or put you in touch with somebody that can make that happen. Looking at hands raised, I'm going to start with Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, great presentation. I always learn so much. There's so much more that goes on in the public works with water around them. I think people realize. I did have a question. I think I caught a comment that a percent of our pipes were 55 years or older.
Yes.
That's
About 25%.
okay. I just want to make sure I captured that.
Yeah, it's about 70, 72 miles, something to that effect, are 55 and older. So that includes, I kind of combine, there's a 55 to 65 and then a 65 and older. So
Is that just kind of continuing to roll as we replace it? We always.
exactly. So when we renewed our water system plan, we look at the schedule to replace the pipes and then reevaluate what the condition will be at the end of the planning cycle. And of course, those numbers, that percentage will grow because we can't replace all that pipe at once. It just costs too much money. So
Great.
yeah, it's a continuous battle. It's a battle every utility faces across the country.
Oh, wonderful. Keep up the good work on the battle. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. Very good report. I am quite happy to hear or to be able to see the advancements made out at Landsberg. Sean, you said that, or did you say that the schools, your department will be inspecting the schools, that the schools have different numbers?
Right. I believe the school led acceptable level is 20 parts per billion. And for us in the drinking water system, it's 15 parts per billion. I don't know why there's a difference, but they're regulated differently than drinking water systems. But with this new rule revision, which we haven't seen the final language, like I mentioned, it will be on us to sample every school and every daycare on a 5-year cycle. We have 5 years to get through all the schools and all the daycares, and then you redo it all over again. And I haven't seen if those numbers are going to be representative of what the drinking water requirements are, or if it'll be what the school requirements are.
Okay. I kind of hope that they come with the drinking water standards. And I'm thinking of the water fountains, all the water fountains around a school.
Right.
Okay.
I would agree with you. And in addition to that, we do the sampling. However, it will be on the school to make any fixes to their plumbing to bring them into compliance. Like you mentioned, drinking water fountain. If it's an old drinking water fountain that has old, lead fittings, copper fittings with the lead solder, it will be on the school to replace those appurtenances.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's also good news.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments?
Yes.
Councilmember Thomas, go ahead.
Was that me?
Yes.
Hey, thanks. Sean, those old pipes that she was talking about, if I remember right, some of them are still the old wooden with wires around them kind of thing, especially up toward the Giberson area.
Oh, we have some of those old relics in our storage shed if you ever want to see one. But no, all the wood stave pipe is out. We don't have
It's gone now.
Yeah, we don't have any in service. We run into it once in a while during a water project that was left in the ground.
Okay.
But no, we don't have any.
Okay.
We don't have any wood pipe, and we don't have any lead goosenecks.
Thank you. Because when I first came here, 2001, there was still some in the ground, like 75 years old, and so okay. Thanks, Sean.
You bet.
Any other questions or comments? All right. Thank you again, Sean, so much for joining us today.
You bet. Thank you. Hope I didn't go too fast.
You did great. All right. We are going to move on in our agenda. The next item, Jeff Dionato is going to talk to us about the emergency management update. Welcome.
Well, good evening, Council President, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a brief overview on what emergency management is and does, as well as the roles you will play as council members during a disaster. I realize this may be new for some of you and a review for others. So anytime during the presentation, feel free to stop me if you have any questions or want me to elaborate on a certain topic. Although I may not see you, so you may have to let Kim know. But so this is our Canada Emergency Management team, and I'm the newest member to the team. But I have 31 years of experience in the fire service. I come to Puget Sound Regional Fire Authority from Maple Valley Fire, where I've held every rank short of the fire chief there, including training chief and operations chief. And my role in a disaster will be the Emergency Coordination Center manager. Kimberly Beheimer has been with Kent Emergency Management for 17 years and is primarily in a planning role now, where she's responsible for updating our various plans. And Jenny Kaiser has been with Kent Emergency Management for 12 years, and she primarily oversees our grants and coordinates CERT training. And although we have our primary functions, we work as a team to accomplish whatever the tasks are at hand. So what is emergency management? Most of what emergency management does falls into these 5 phases. That's prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery. And I'll give a brief overview of each of these, and then we'll go into more detail on the response phase, since that is really what emergency management is all about, and how we as a city will respond to a disaster. So the first one is prevention. And prevention focuses on preventing human hazards. It's primarily from potential natural disasters or terrorist attacks. Preventative measures are designed to provide a more permanent protection from disasters. But as we know, not all disasters can be prevented. The way we limit the risk of loss of life and injury is through the development of good evacuation plans, environmental planning, and design standards. Preparedness is the next slide, and that's preparedness is a continuous cycle of planning, organizing, training, equipping, exercising, evaluating, and taking corrective action. This is really where we spend the majority of our efforts and time, and our work is focused on updating the plans and then exercising them. Training and exercising plans is really the key to preparedness. So some of the main plans and grants that we maintain are the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan, the Hazard Mitigation Plan, the Emergency Coordination Center Standard Operations Procedures, Continuity of Operations and Continuity of Government, and the Emergency Management Performance Grant. In terms of community outreach, education, this includes our CERT classes and training, our community events like cornucopia days, and presentations to groups like homeowners associations. And then the supplies and equipment that we prepare is we do have some personal protective equipment that we keep on hand, MREs and water for the ECC staff and public works operations, 3-day comfort kits for city employees. We have a communications van, shelter trailer, generators, and other supplies and equipment. So next is mitigation. And mitigation is the effort to reduce loss of life and property by lessening the impact of disasters and emergencies. This can be done through both structural and non-structural measures. The structural mitigation actions change the characteristics of buildings or the environment. And examples include flood control projects, raising building elevations, and clearing areas around structures. And non-structural mitigation most often entails adopting or changing building codes. In fact, as you know, you just recently adopted an update to our regional hazard mitigation plan there. So that's the example of mitigation. Next is response, and that is comprised of coordination and management of resources, including personnel, equipment, and supplies. And this is where we activate the ECC, the Emergency Coordination Center, to an appropriate level. And we'll discuss this in further detail on later slides. And lastly, there's recovery. And recovery consists of those activities that continue beyond the emergency period to restore critical community functions and begin to manage stabilization efforts. The recovery phase begins immediately after the threat of human life has subsided. And the goal of recovery phase is to bring the affected area back to some degree of normalcy. Although it's not a typical disaster situation, we are currently heavily involved in recovery with COVID right now. And that includes coordinating the reimbursement money through FEMA and other sources, coordination of recovery activities to restore our critical functions and bring stabilization to a very difficult and unprecedented time. And we're also assisting with the logistical challenges of scarce resources, such as personal protective equipment. So legal authorities that authorize and obligate our city to provide emergency management include RCW 38.52.005. And this law directs cities to establish an emergency management organization. And that is done through our Kent City Code, which is pursuant to this, hereby established in the city an emergency management organization for the purpose of performing emergency services functions in support of city operations. And that also designates the fire chief as the director of emergency management. So then that is established or done through the interlocal agreement with Puget Sound Regional Fire Authority, and in which outlines the roles and responsibilities and the level of emergency management services that will be provided from the RFA to the city. So those roles and responsibilities include these as the main topics that we do. Obviously, there's more, but so the management of plans and grants, as we touched on before, this includes the emergency management performance grant. For instance, so as an example, this year that grant is being used to update AV equipment in the classrooms at the police and fire training facility at Station 74, as well as updates to the ECC technology that are there also. The ECC, this includes the functionality of the ECC itself. So that's the technology. So much what we're using those grant dollars for this year. It also includes training the red and blue teams that will staff the ECC in a disaster. And that is made up of Kent staff that are used during a disaster. And also coordinating and facilitating during a disaster. This includes setting up the ECC and then the management of the red and blue teams during that. In addition, the employee education and training is not only for the ECC, as we talked about, but it's also the ICS and understanding ICS, and that's the NIMS training that I believe you have been involved in with to a degree. It also includes managing volunteers, which we'll cover in the next slide. Community education and outreach, which we've talked about, the cornucopia days, and then recovery management, which we also discussed. So WAC 118.04 states that there will be an establishment of emergency worker program. And so the way that we do that, we have two types of volunteers that volunteer for the city. And the first one is the pre-registered volunteers. And this is primarily the communication support team. And these folks are our ham radio group, and they manage and staff our communications van, so that in the case of all other communications failing, then they can set up a network of ham radios so that we can communicate both locally and regionally down to the state. So we have a devoted members that volunteer their time for us doing that. The other part of that is application or registration of any emergency workers during a disaster for doing things like sandbagging or anything that we need them in a disaster to do. That has to come through an established emergency management organization so that we can use the Emergency Worker Act to provide liability coverage for those volunteers through the State Emergency Management Division. So now we'll talk about response, and so in the response phase, that is triggered by the activation of our Emergency Coordination Center, the ECC. And there's 3 levels of activation, and it depends on the situation and the need for coordination and support. So level 3 is the lowest level of activation, and that takes place in the Centennial Center on the 4th floor in our offices there, where we are able to manage that smaller incident there. We have the technology there to manage that. And that's really where one or more department operations centers have activated and request assistance. That's a major regional event has occurred. That could be like COVID, or an event in a neighboring city. A significant local or regional event has occurred, snowstorm, flooding, things like that, or an extreme weather warning is broadcasted and we're anticipating a need. So when we step up to level 2, that's where we move to the Police Fire Training Center, and that's for both level 2 and level 3, and use the classrooms and conference rooms there. So level 2 is really, there is a strong potential that a department attempting to control an emergency will exhaust its resources before bringing the emergency under control. And then the level 1 is really, that's a state of emergency has been declared. County, state, and federal assistance is required to deal with an emergency of such magnitude that local resources, including mutual aid assistance, are insufficient to adequately respond. Those are those very large events, the CNN events. So don't happen very often. So what do you do as council members during the response phase of a disaster? So there's basically a small ICS structure that you are the policy group above the ECC, and your function then, your role is to establish the policy in collaboration with the mayor. And this is right out of the basic plan of the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. So it's established policy, maintain normal council activities as appropriate under the guidelines established by Kent Resolution number 1516, adopt and enact emergency ordinances, resolutions, and appropriate revenue to meet emergency needs before, during, and after an emergency or disaster. And then upon request of the mayor or the director of emergency management, host and accompany visiting governmental officials on tours of the emergency or disaster area. And then the last one is really separate from the response phase, but that's being and participating in emergency management training and drills, exercises, post-incident reviews, and support of the Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan and its emergency support functions. So the emergency, so when we talk about the different sections, the ECC will control that's and this is straight out of NIMS ICS. So The four sections that we staff with our red and blue teams are operations section, and they collaborate with all of the department operations centers, and they coordinate the response and recovery activities appropriate to disaster-generated demands. When multiple incident command posts are established, the operations section can also serve as an area command. Logistics section is responsible for providing necessary supplies, services, equipment, facilities, and personnel for the event. Finance and administrative section is responsible for keeping records of financial and employment activities, clerical support where needed, contracts, payment of goods procured by logistics, cost accounting, and overtime of workers. This section also works with responding agencies in documenting disaster expenditures and costs. And then lastly is the planning section. And that's a big section because that they collect, analyze, display, and disseminate information regarding the incident. They develop recommendations for the incident action plan, direct planning meetings, and produce required situation reports for the ECC and other jurisdictions. Planning is responsible for knowing what has happened, what is happening, and what is going to happen, otherwise called situational awareness. And this section then advises the ECC emergency manager on needed resources, damage assessment, priorities, and future needs. Then as we step down there, the last thing is the coordination between department operation centers and the ECC. So most of the departments within the city have a department operations center that will conduct disaster operations. And some departments have support advisory functions. Department roles and responsibilities are all identified in the comprehensive emergency management plan. And that coordination of operations happens at the ECC. So in most of our incidents, for instance, let's say we have a snowstorm, then the Public Works DOC will activate as they are dealing with the snowstorm, and we will activate then to a level 3 ECC and support their needs, be it if they need more sand, if they need any other kind of resources. So anytime one of those DOCs listed in red are activated, then we will activate our ECC to a level 3. So then when we are no longer able to get the resources through the established mutual aid agreements that we have in place, or a broader regional need to coordinate resources is apparent, that's when we can request assistance and or resources from King County Emergency Management. And then if King County Emergency Management isn't able to fill those requests, then that is all forwarded on to Washington State EMD. So we work closely with those folks to coordinate and are working on doing that coordination training. At least we had big plans for this year with the complex coordinated terrorist attack drill and to be accomplished this year, but that has been thwarted so far by COVID. So really, what can you do now as council members? And one thing that we say in emergency management is if you want to help at the city during a disaster, you have to be prepared at home. And some of the things that really are important to have in place for all of us is to have a family disaster plan. And that includes a communications plan, how we will connect with our household by having out of area contacts or meeting locations, developing a disaster kit, knowing that and being prepared at home to live for 2 weeks without any government support, and then you knowing your role and what's expected of you once that's accomplished. So we've worked with local emergency management offices to develop a regional campaign called makeitthrough.org, which is a great place to get information to prepare for disasters. It has lots of great resources there. Then also hot off the press, and I'm not sure if you have it in your hands yet, but there's an updated executive handbook that we just completed yesterday, and I gave to Derek so you should have one shortly if you don't have it yet. And this just basically gives a quick summary of different scenarios and references that can be helpful in a disaster. So there is the brief overview, and open to any questions at this time.
Thank you so much. I know that some members had asked, so do you have any additional questions or comments? Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. We used to have little cards quite a while back for the out-of-state contacts. Does your department still make those or give those out to residents?
That's a good question. I can definitely look into that and see. I know that we've done a number of different giveaways that we do at the community events, but yeah, that may be something we can look at.
Thank you.
Farmer. Yep, there you go.
I can't hear Tony well, but I have a question if I can go ahead.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
So thank you, Jeff. This is a great presentation. I had told Derek I was particularly interested in this, just given that it's 2020 and who knows what the year holds. And a couple questions. So I think, one of the things that we saw with COVID that I know that, I don't know that I fully understand, and I'm sure the public didn't either, is that there's times when we're responsible for the response. There's other times it would be King County or the state level. So what determines that so if there were to be a more isolated physical disaster, is it sort of like within our city limits, we handle it and we stand up the ECC? Or, what determines that versus, us versus, a larger response?
That's a great question. And to be honest, COVID has really challenged us in emergency management. And I don't think people anticipated quite how the coordination would go for this, because we plan for disasters, earthquakes, floods, those types of things, which are stemmed out of local needs for resources, and then that moves up the chain, as I explained, to King County and to the state. But COVID was interesting, and to be honest, I think it still is of how does emergency management support and manage this? And early on, to be honest, locally, regionally here in King County, there was a bit of a challenge of whether that was going to be King County Public Health or if that was going to be King County Emergency Management. And it took a little bit of time before they were able to determine how the scarce resources, the PPE, the needs for N95s, all of those things that we were looking to get both nationally and from state stockpiles, how those coordination were going to take place. And it was clunky at first. I think we've gotten better and we've learned that it does belong and should be in emergency management and public health. And the King County Executive's offices have kind of been able to morph that into what we would consider a more typical way to manage these disasters.
Great. And then my second question is around volunteers. You talked about there being spontaneous volunteers, but they still need to be registered. So like in the event of an earthquake or something, you know, I'm sure you get flooded with community members wanting to help, but do they need to actually, when you say register, does that more like they need to be like Red Cross certified volunteers?
No, and actually we can register them on site during an emergency, and that's why it needs to be done through emergency management so that they can be connected to the Emergency Worker Act and be protected, you know, from liability on that coverage, and then we are able to verify their certifications for that. But yeah, we register those volunteers at the time of an emergency.
Okay, great, thank you.
And a lot of those folks are CERT members and those that have already shown an interest in helping out their community. Great, good questions.
Thank you, everyone. Any other questions or comments? All right, wonderful information. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us.
Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our agenda. So I am going to end the workshop for now and look forward to seeing everyone back here at 7 p.m. for the council meeting. Thanks so much for joining us.